Have you ever wondered how long you'd last without a fridge, supermarket, or Uber Eats? What if your next meal depended on whether your cow gave milk or your neighbor felt like bartering a turnip? Did people really eat the same soup every day for months? And what the heck is suet pudding? You're about to live a day in the 1800s, through your stomach. But first, a warning. Unless you're into salt pork, burnt crusts, and questionable pickles, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Watch until the end, because every detail will give you goosebumps. You wake up before the sun, cold air nipping at your face. Your stomach already aches a little, but there's no such thing as a quick bite. You need to gather eggs, if the hen's laid. Milk the cow, if she's not dry. Grind grains. Knead dough. Tend the fire. Breakfast is a commitment. Most food doesn't come from shelves. It comes from you. And if last year's harvest was poor or the root cellar moldy, you're starting the day hungry. Historians still argue whether rural diets were truly healthy or just barely survivable. Depending on the region, one curious truth: in some colder climates, families slept through much of winter in a semi-hibernation state, just to conserve calories. You're beginning to see why food wasn't just nourishment, it was survival strategy. You start the fire, or at least try to. The wood's damp from the frost, and your fingers still sting from milking the cow. Breakfast isn't waiting for you, it's hiding inside sacks, barrels, and smokehouses. You slice a hunk of yesterday's bread, hard as a roof tile, and toast it over the embers. Maybe there's a scrap of salted pork fat to rub on top. If you're lucky, more likely, it's just weak tea or coffee brewed from roasted chicory roots. Yes, people faked coffee even back then. In some homes, corn mush or porridge is the staple, stirred slowly while children yawn by the fire. No sugar, of course. Maybe molasses if you're among the blessed. Some historians suggest that even wealthier households often reused yesterday's leftovers for breakfast, reheated pies. Beans, cold meats, not glamorous, but efficient. What's strange is how routine this all is. Breakfast isn't celebrated, it's functional. Fuel for labor. And there's barely time to chew. A quirky side note: in some American frontier regions, Johnny cakes, cornmeal pancakes fried on a flat stone, were popular. But sometimes they were so dense they doubled as makeshift plates. Eat the food, then eat the dish. Modern-day edible packaging has nothing on that. As your stomach settles, and your fingers finally stop tingling, you're already thinking about lunch. Because despite the hard work ahead, this first meal felt more like a quiet apology than a real embrace. And with no pantry snacks or vending machines in sight, the countdown begins again. By midday, your stomach is snarling louder than the oxen outside. Lunch, often called dinner in the 1800s, is the main event. But don't expect a buffet. You gather what's available: thick, mealy root vegetables from the cellar, maybe a few sprigs of wild herbs if it's spring, and whatever's been simmering over the hearth since morning. Stew is your safest bet, everything edible thrown into one pot, bubbling for hours to make even the toughest turnip feel edible. You slop it into a wooden bowl and grab a spoon, if you even have one. Forks weren't universally used yet, many still ate with knives and fingers. Especially in rural households, the stew smells like smoke, onion, and fatigue. Maybe there's barley in it, maybe yesterday's bones. Bread is your side dish again, always bread. In wealthier homes, you might get a pie stuffed with leftover meat or vegetables, sealed with lard crust. Delicious? That's optimistic. Durable? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether the crust was always eaten or just used as a cooking vessel. Some people simply scooped out the filling and fed the shell to animals or servants. In German immigrant communities, sausages and sauerkraut sometimes stole the spotlight. While in the American South, fried cornmeal and collards became staples. If you're laboring in the field, you eat fast, sitting on a stump, shielding your bowl from dust and flies. Lunch might be the biggest meal of the day, but it's still eaten under pressure. Chores never rest. And neither do you. As the sun dips low and the sky bleeds orange, your stomach reminds you that it's time, again, to scavenge for sustenance. Supper, or tea, if you're feeling fancy, isn't a grand finale. It's a replay. Cold stew, reheated gruel, or bread softened with warm milk. If you're lucky, there's a fresh pot of beans or porridge. If you're not, it's crusts, salted scraps, or broth so thin you can see the bottom of the bowl. Dinner fatigue sets in, because variety just isn't part of the 1800s diet. You eat what you have, and you have what didn't spoil. Candles flicker, casting shadows that dance on the rough kitchen walls. You sip something warm, maybe herbal tea or thin beer. In some homes, cider or small ale was common, even for children, because water couldn't always be trusted. One oddity, in colder climates, potatoes were baked in ashes and then carried to bed as makeshift hand warmers, before being eaten the next morning. Multitasking, 19th century style. Table manners depend on where you sit in society. Wealthy families recite prayers, eat in courses, and debate politics. You huddle by the hearth and chew in silence, sharing space with your siblings. Smoke, and the odd barn cat licking a tin plate. Historians still argue whether rural families ate together or separately. Customs varied wildly. And records are spotty. But one thing's certain, nobody wastes food. Even the drippings get saved for tomorrow's fry-up. By the time you blow out the candle, your belly is modestly full, but your tongue still craves something sweet. And now comes the real mystery. Did they have dessert? Sugar isn't just rare, it's almost mythical. You don't casually sprinkle it on your porridge or stir it into your tea unless you're wealthy, or stealing from someone who is. Still, your sweet tooth doesn't disappear just because it's 1803. So, you turn to what's available: molasses, honey, dried fruits, anything sticky, chewy, or naturally sweet. Maybe you nibble a slice of apple pie if you're lucky, though the apples might be shriveled from long storage, and the crust could double as roofing material. Welcome to dessert. In wealthier homes, cakes filled with dried currants or puddings made with suet, yes, beef fat, are common. You might even spot blancmange, a pale jelly like custard, wobbling ominously on a silver plate. But for most folks, a treat means a roasted chestnut, a spoonful of jam, or a thick biscuit sweetened with maple syrup. And yes, squirrels sometimes ended up in those pies. Not for flavor, just because that's what was caught. One odd fact? Ice cream existed, for the elite. George Washington reportedly spent a small fortune on it during his presidency. But unless you've got an icehouse and servants, your tongue won't be tasting frozen anything. Historians still argue whether certain colonial sweets actually filtered down to the working class or remained locked in cookbooks for the rich. You finish your tiny indulgence while staring into the fire, trying not to think about the next day's chores. And while you chew, you wonder, why do some people get feasts while others make do with boiled onions? What lands on your plate says more about your status than any title ever could. If you're a tenant farmer, your meals revolve around what you can grow: grains, cabbage, maybe a chicken on Sunday. A landowner, though, he might dine on roast duck with brandy sauce, imported spices, and a side of smug superiority. For the poor, every meal is an equation. How much food equals how many days of labor? For the rich, it's an art form, a display of wealth you can chew. You sneak glimpses of the manor house through hedgerows, long tables covered in linen, silver dishes clinking, servants offering wine. Meanwhile, your dinner is still cooling in a chipped bowl, and your spoon is carved from wood. Historians still argue whether nobles really ate better quality food, or just more of it. Some claim that overindulgence led to early gout and rotten teeth, while the poor, despite eating less, sometimes fared better in terms of digestion, if not dignity. A fringe fact? In some towns, poorhouses served inmates better meals than what free laborers ate at home. But those meals came with rules, punishment, and a complete loss of freedom. Suddenly, that bland stew in your own cottage doesn't taste so bad. And then there are the famines, when crops fail, livestock dies, and both rich and poor stare at empty plates. Hunger, after all, is the great equalizer. You wipe your mouth with a sleeve and swallow the last of your pride. No seconds tonight, no thirds tomorrow, just enough. The fire fades to embers. Your meal, simple, honest, is behind you, and the silence of the 1800s settles in. But our journey doesn't end here. If this glimpse into the past stirred your curiosity, leave a comment, hit like, or share with someone who'd love this too. It helps keep stories like these alive.